Welcome to True Crime Threads, where we unravel the chilling tales behind real-life crimes. Today we dive deep into a case that shook the city, uncovering a shocking truth far darker than anyone could have imagined. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when the police received an urgent call from a local high-rise apartment building. The address was well known in the city, home to Robert Lawson, a prominent businessman whose name appeared in local news for his charitable contributions and successful ventures. However, this morning the call was not about a routine matter. It was about a murder. Officers rushed to the scene, their minds racing with questions. Have you any questions? Who could want Robert dead? What had happened in the apartment? When they arrived, the scene was nothing short of shocking. Robert's lifeless body lay in the middle of the living room, surrounded by pristine white furniture, untouched and eerily perfect. The apartment had a modern, sleek design. Nothing seemed out of place. But as the officers looked closer, the blood stains on the polished wooden floor told a different story. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no obvious signs of a struggle. It was as if someone had just walked in, carried out the act, and left without a trace. The police quickly secured the apartment, examining the scene carefully. Robert's wife, Camille, was found in a nearby room, sitting quietly, her face pale and eyes swollen from crying. The children, two young teenagers, sat huddled together in shock, unable to comprehend what had happened. The officers questioned Camille, but she could barely speak, only managing to whisper that she had found her husband lying on the floor when she returned from running errands. She was in complete disbelief, unable to process the horror unfolding before her eyes. Nothing in her demeanor gave away any suspicion or guilt. To her, this was a tragedy beyond words. As the days went on, the investigation began to unfold, and the city was thrown into a state of confusion and fear. Robert Lawson had been a successful businessman with no known enemies, someone who had built his empire from the ground up. His reputation in the community was spotless. His company was one of the most respected in the industry, and he had a family that seemed to be just as perfect as his career. So why had he been killed? Detectives began digging into Robert's personal life, trying to uncover any clues that could explain the motive behind the murder. They spoke to his colleagues, friends, and family members. Robert had seemed to have it all: a beautiful family, a thriving business, a spotless reputation. But as they delved deeper, they found cracks in this seemingly perfect life. While Robert had been admired by many, a few people hinted that he wasn't as perfect as he appeared. Some co-workers spoke of his cutthroat business practices, while others whispered about tense relationships in his personal life. But none of this provided clear evidence of someone who would want him dead. Then the breakthrough came. Hidden in Robert's study, the police discovered a set of confidential documents that revealed troubling information. These documents painted a picture of a man involved in shady business dealings, payoffs, hidden accounts, and contracts that were far from legal. It was clear that Robert had been mixing business with questionable ethics. But still, the motive for murder seemed unclear. Was someone threatening him over these activities? Was he involved with people who would resort to violence to protect their interests? The more the detectives uncovered, the more they realized that Robert's life, though outwardly perfect, had a much darker side. But even with all the evidence pointing to something sinister, the murder remained a mystery. The police had no suspects, no clear motive, and no obvious leads. What had happened to Robert Lawson? And who had wanted him dead? As the investigation dragged on, the city waited for answers, holding its breath in anticipation. Every twist and turn revealed more, but the truth remained elusive. The crime that had shocked the city seemed to be part of a much larger puzzle, one that no one could yet solve. While the police focused on Robert's business dealings, a closer examination of his family life began to raise more questions than answers. His wife Camille was devastated by the loss of her husband, but something about her grief felt off. She was often found in seclusion, her eyes red from crying, but her demeanor didn't match the overwhelming sorrow one would expect from a wife who had just lost her spouse. There was a distance, an emotionless quality in her actions that didn't escape the attention of the detectives. Camille had been married to Robert for over 15 years, and on the surface, their relationship appeared to be as perfect as the life they led. They had 2 children, a beautiful home, and were the picture of a successful family. However, as the detectives began to dig deeper into Camille's life, they uncovered a web of secrets that cast a shadow over their seemingly perfect marriage. As the investigation continued, it was revealed that Camille had been having an affair. The affair, however, wasn't with just anyone. It was with a man named James, a local figure with a reputation for violence and a history of aggressive behavior. James wasn't a person that Robert would have welcomed into his life, but it was clear that Camille had been seeing him behind Robert's back. The detectives found evidence of the affair in the form of private messages, photos, and even a set of hotel room receipts. But the affair wasn't the only secret Camille had been hiding. As the police dug further, they learned that she had been aware of Robert's illegal activities. While Robert had kept his dealings under wraps, Camille had known about the shady side of his business for years. She had been complicit, silently helping him cover up his involvement in criminal activities. This knowledge sent shockwaves through the investigation. Was Camille involved in Robert's murder? Had she orchestrated the killing in a bid to free herself from the man she had come to despise? The detectives continued to question Camille, but she remained calm. Almost too calm. She denied any involvement in the crime, maintaining that she had loved her husband and couldn't understand why anyone would want him dead. But there was something in her story that didn't add up. Camille's quiet demeanor didn't match the frantic grief of a woman whose life had just been shattered. It seemed as though she had accepted Robert's death with an eerie sense of composure. The discovery of Camille's affair with James further complicated the investigation. James, a man with a violent past, was someone who had nothing to lose. His temper had gotten him into trouble before, and the police couldn't help but wonder if his involvement in Robert's murder was more than just a side note. Was it possible that James had killed Robert in a fit of rage? Or had Camille played a more active role in the crime, manipulating the situation to her advantage? Was it possible that Camille played a more active role in the crime, manipulating the situation to her advantage? With every new detail that came to light, the question of Camille's involvement loomed larger. The affair, her knowledge of Robert's illegal dealings, and her strange behavior all pointed to a woman who was hiding something much darker than grief. Was she the grieving widow she appeared to be? Or was she a woman who had orchestrated her husband's death in a calculated attempt to escape her own complicated life? The detectives were no closer to finding the truth, but one thing was certain. The web of secrets surrounding Robert's family was far from over. The investigation took a dramatic turn when a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While the police had been focusing on Camille's affair and Robert's business dealings, a hidden surveillance video emerged that would change the course of the case. The footage, retrieved from a nearby convenience store, showed a figure entering the apartment building on the night of Robert's murder. The footage was grainy and the figure's face was obscured, but the outline and the movements were enough to catch the detective's attention. The figure had been seen entering the building at approximately the same time Robert's death occurred. The video wasn't much, but it was a lead. The police worked tirelessly to analyze the footage, looking for any clues that could help identify the mysterious figure. After several days of painstaking review, they managed to discern a few distinguishing features, mainly the person's height and the way they walked. Though these details weren't much, they were enough to confirm that the person wasn't anyone from Robert's inner circle. The figure was not a familiar face, and their presence in the building at such a critical time raised even more questions. Detectives began to expand their investigation, looking into anyone who had visited the building in the weeks leading up to the murder. The more they examined the footage, the more they realized that the figure had been present in the building several times before, always at odd hours, always moving quickly and quietly, never drawing attention to themselves. Someone had been watching Robert, but for what purpose? Why hadn't they been noticed, and why had they chosen this particular moment to act? Further investigation revealed that Robert's business was entangled with several unsavory organizations. He had been a part of a network that included people involved in illegal activities, from money laundering to arms deals. These organizations were known for using violence to maintain control, and Robert had been in deep with them for years. As the police began to connect the dots, they discovered that Robert had been playing both sides. He had been extorting money from these groups while maintaining a facade of being a reputable businessman. It was a dangerous game, and one that had likely put him at odds with the wrong people. The more the police uncovered, the clearer it became that Robert's death had been meticulously planned. The mysterious figure on the surveillance footage was no random stranger. They were part of something much larger. But who were they? And how were they connected to Robert's criminal activities? The investigation took another turn when it was revealed that Robert had been involved with people who had everything to gain from silencing him. How did they do it? His silence was worth more than his life to these criminals. As the detectives pieced together Robert's business dealings and the mysterious figure's presence in the building, they began to see a pattern. It wasn't just about the money or the power. Robert's betrayal had likely cost someone dearly. The figure in the video, though not yet identified, had been involved in more than just a random act of violence. They had been watching Robert, studying his every move, waiting for the right moment to strike. But the deeper the investigation went, the more confusing it became. Was the mysterious figure working alone, or were they part of a larger conspiracy? Were they a pawn in a much bigger game, or the mastermind behind the plot? The police were no closer to finding answers, but one thing was certain. Robert's murder was not a simple crime of passion. It was part of a much darker and more complex web that threatened to unravel everything the detectives had assumed about the case. The investigation began to take a darker turn when detectives uncovered a crucial piece of information, one that would completely change the direction of the case. While they had been focusing on Robert's business dealings, his criminal connections, and the mysterious figure in the surveillance footage, they had overlooked something in Robert's past that had finally come to light. It was a betrayal that went back years, long before his rise to success. Robert had once been a close friend to a man named James, someone who had trusted him completely. But somewhere along the way their friendship had shattered. James, it turned out, had been betrayed by Robert in a way that would destroy any relationship. The two men had been business partners early in their careers, and Robert had promised to help James through difficult times. But in a turn of events, Robert had cut ties with James, leaving him with nothing, while Robert walked away with everything. This betrayal had haunted James for years, festering like an open wound. Robert's rise to power and wealth had been built on the very back of the man he had left behind, and James could never forgive him for it. As the detectives dug deeper into this part of Robert's history, they discovered something chilling. James had never truly moved on from his hatred for Robert. Instead, he had spent years plotting his revenge, watching Robert's every move from the shadows. He had bided his time, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when Robert's involvement with criminal organizations was revealed, James saw his chance. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about making Robert pay for what he had done to him. James knew about Robert's shady business dealings. He had been keeping an eye on him for years, studying his movements, learning his weaknesses. When James found out that Robert was mixed up with dangerous criminal groups, the opportunity to act became too tempting. Robert's death wasn't just about money or power, it was about settling an old score. James's motive for murder was personal, and the detectives now had a clearer picture of why Robert had been killed. But as the police began to piece together this twisted tale of betrayal and revenge, a new revelation stunned them. The connection between James and Camille, Robert's wife, was far more complex than they had initially realized. Camille had known about the betrayal and the hatred James held for her husband. In fact, she had been aware of James's plans long before the murder took place. As it turned out, Camille and James had been involved in a secret affair, one that had begun long before Robert's death. Their relationship had been more than just an illicit fling. It had been a partnership built on resentment and a shared desire for revenge. Camille had been the one to fuel James's anger, convincing him that Robert deserved to pay for his actions. She had been complicit in his plot, encouraging him every step of the way. She had provided him with insider information about Robert's daily routine, his business meetings, and the vulnerabilities in his life. James's actions were not just a result of his own thirst for revenge, they were carefully orchestrated with Camille's help. The detectives now realized that Camille's role in Robert's murder went far beyond that of a grieving widow. She had been an active participant in her husband's death, manipulating the situation to fit her own desires. The full scope of the betrayal was mind-boggling. Camille had known that her affair with James was dangerous, but she had gone along with it, not realizing the deadly path it would lead them down. She had allowed her anger and resentment towards Robert to cloud her judgment, pushing her into a twisted alliance with James. Together, they had planned Robert's death, using his criminal connections as the perfect cover. As the detectives closed in on the truth, they were left with a haunting realization. The crime that had shaken the city was not just the work of a single individual, but the result of a dark and destructive partnership between a wife and her lover. What had initially appeared to be a crime of passion was, in fact, a carefully planned act of revenge, a plot that had been years in the making. As the investigation reached its final stages, the detectives were left with one overwhelming question. How far did Camille and James's plan go? They had uncovered the truth about their affair, their shared hatred for Robert, and their role in orchestrating his death. But what remained unclear was whether Camille had been completely complicit, or if there had been a moment of doubt, a flicker of remorse that might have changed the outcome of that fateful night. The answer came when the police gained access to Camille's private journals, which she had kept hidden away in her bedroom. The journals were filled with reflections, regrets, and occasional bursts of anger. As the detectives pored over the pages, one entry stood out above all others. In it, Camille described a moment of hesitation just days before the murder. She had expressed her doubts about going through with the plan, even questioning whether James truly wanted revenge or if he was simply using her. There was a deep inner conflict within Camille, one that suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with the path she had chosen. She had known that killing Robert would change everything, destroying her family, her life, and her sense of self. But in the end, she had convinced herself that it was the only way out. The detectives also uncovered messages between Camille and James in the days leading up to Robert's death. These messages revealed a disturbing shift in their relationship. While Camille had once seemed motivated by a desire for vengeance, she had also begun to question whether killing Robert would solve anything at all. She had even tried to pull back, suggesting they find another way to get rid of Robert without resorting to murder. But James was relentless. His anger had consumed him, and he pushed Camille to stay the course. Camille's internal struggle was evident in the messages. She was torn between her guilt and her loyalty to James, who had become more of an obsession than a lover. Despite her moments of doubt, Camille ultimately went through with the plan. She and James had arranged the murder to look like a break-in gone wrong, hoping to make it seem like a random act of violence. They believed it would be the perfect cover for their crime, allowing them to walk away scot-free. But the police had quickly disproven that theory, uncovering the truth, piece by piece. 19. The final piece of the puzzle came when the detectives located James. His violent past had made him a prime suspect, and when they found him hiding in a small apartment in the city, he didn't try to run. James knew the game was up. Faced with mounting evidence and the pressure of a long interrogation, he finally broke. He admitted to everything. He confirmed the affair, the planning, and how Camille had played a pivotal role in Robert's murder. But even more chilling than James's confession was the realization that Camille, despite her conflicted feelings, had been the one to lead him to the apartment on the night of the murder. She had unlocked the door, ensuring that James could enter without triggering any alarms. When the deed was done, she had played the part of the devastated widow, feigning shock and horror when she found her husband's body. Her performance had been convincing enough to fool those closest to her, but it hadn't fooled the detectives. As the case came to a close, Camille and James were arrested and charged with Robert's murder. The trial that followed was filled with dramatic revelations as Camille's secret life was exposed to the public. The city that had once viewed her as a grieving wife now saw her for what she truly was, a woman who had betrayed her husband, her family, and even herself. James, meanwhile, was shown to be a man consumed by vengeance and anger, using his connections with Camille to fulfill his own twisted sense of justice. The case shocked the city to its core, not only because of the murder itself, but because of the betrayal that had unfolded behind closed doors. The story of Camille and James was one of greed, revenge, and manipulation, a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous criminals are those who hide in plain sight.